It's interesting, and some of you might like to know these couple words. Occasionally it's good to encourage ourselves with these facts. But Arthur Rubinstein, the concert pianist, has recently come to know Christ and is now an open witness for Jesus. Many of you have probably already heard that Chet Huntley, just before he died in Montana, in fact, the last 6 or 8 months of his life were lived in a very vibrant Christian testimony after having received the Lord. And also Mickey Rooney recently, after all of his ups and downs and marriages and problems, has come to know the Lord in a very warm and personal way and is bearing fervent testimony to Christ. And I think you also know that Johnny Cash, who's going to be in our town this weekend, is also continuing on a consistent basis to bear fervent witness to Christ. And the Lord is just kind of tapping people on the shoulders in all areas of life and giving them a marvelous call to his own presence. And I think it's very beautiful, wonderful. I want to make a couple of comments because there's been a little confusion about this subject, so let me make some comments. We are continuing a Wednesday night program for boys and girls. We are in desperate need of personnel. It came to the place where 2 weeks ago I met with the overworked and under-personnel people and said, look, if the church doesn't want this ministry, let it die. There's no reason for you to bear the load of this program. And there was a universal cry from their hearts that that should not be done. And so we are meeting together. We met this evening, and we have another meeting. There will be a regular Wednesday night program. We are remodeling the program to be one of our own makeup. It will involve a third of recreation, a third of crafts, and a third of inspirational programming. They will meet some of the time together and some of the time in separate groups. But we desperately need workers. And I want to say this very much to your heart. There comes a point in your life where you cannot receive beyond your willingness to give. And folks who only want to receive inevitably become dry wells. It's just absolutely true. In fact, there's a double tragedy. People who only give and don't want to receive become equally dry wells. But those who only receive and are not giving. Now, I would challenge you. Now, you can't do everything. There are people like Don Schmick and others who are so talented that we just lay all the load on them. And that just can't be. But on the other hand, everybody can do something. I like what the man said. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And what I can do, I will do. For example, it might be possible that you'd be willing to give up the first third of basically our Wednesday night. We try to keep it on a 90-minute program, as near to that as we can. And maybe you'd be willing to sacrifice the singing time and work with the recreational part of the Wednesday night program for boys and girls. Or maybe you like that part and you'd just as soon not hear the teaching part, or you feel that that's something you're willing to sacrifice. And you'd be willing. Now, the same thing is true in our junior church program or our morning church. We have had consistently 4 children's churches. Now, 2 of them have met all summer. We've had a nursery and a beginners church program. And our primary and our junior did not meet during the summer. Now, we're having great difficulty getting them started again because a lot of folks just want to receive the blessing and not to give the effort of teaching, training, being a part. And I challenge you, and that's all I'm going to do. I have a commitment before God that I've made. Anything that only goes if the pastor pushes, it's going to die. And I've said this to you publicly. Anything in the church that demands the pastor pushing it doesn't deserve to live. If it's not something you want, and you feel about, and you're willing to support, and you're willing to do, then there's no reason for it to exist. And that's true in every area of our church program. We have wonderful workers, dedicated workers, and I'm deeply grateful to them. But many of them are very overworked, and they're carrying 2 and 3 jobs instead of just one. Whereas if all of us would do something, then the load would be so much easier. It was both funny and it was tragic tonight. As Rosemary Anderson and I were walking out of the dining hall toward this committee meeting, I said, "Are you going to this meeting tonight?" And Rose turned to me with her exhausted look and said, "Yes, what's this committee meeting about?" And I'll tell you, some of us are just on so many boards and meetings that we really do wonder sometimes. And I just have a commitment in my heart that that's just not going to continue. And so that's something for you to pray about. I'm not bawling you out. In fact, I'm willing to have every kid in the Sunday school in church. I've got a good set of vocal cords, and I'm just willing to have it happen that way. Unfortunately, they don't get much out of worship on an adult level, and it certainly compromises our ability to reach outsiders in the worship services. But what needs to die must die. We just cannot longer just sustain things on the back of 1 or 2 or 3 people. So I just share that with you, and you do it as you will. The second thing I want to talk to you about tonight, just off my heart, before we get into a few minutes, at least in Proverbs this evening, concerns the meeting with Ken Wright. Now, there's been some confusion about this, and I want to be very clear. Ken Wright is a wonderful man of God. He's a Bible teacher, much like Campbell McAlpine. He's a layman that God has unusually anointed. He's greatly used of God in the ministry of discernment. He's a very prophetic person. In fact, those people who know him, like Lauren Cunningham and others, call him an apostle and refer to his ministry as apostolic, because he's a man that's just in touch with God. The Johnsons, the Holdervines, some of the others, Phil and Kathy and others, have been under his ministry. But I have not felt led of the Lord to do anything else other than to have him, as far as pushing you. He's going to be in our Sunday night service, and I believe every Christian that's a part of this church should be in Sunday night church and not watching Fiddler on the Roof. And he's going to be speaking next Wednesday night, and he's going to be speaking the next Sunday night. Now he's booked. Those are church activities, and I expect you to be here for those 3 occasions. But he's also going to be speaking in our church every morning, Monday through Thursday at 10:15, and every evening at 7:30, Monday through Thursday. Now, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday is completely up to you. I'm not going to beg you, pressure you, twist your arm, nor am I going to wave the banner of Peninsula Christian Center and say all loyal Peninsula Christian Center people should be here. I'm not going to say that. If you feel like you should be here and God speaks to you about these meetings, and if you hear them Sunday night and God speaks to you about being here, then I want you to be here. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Because if you get zapped on Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday night, I don't take any responsibility for it, see? All right. There is no service Friday night. Prayer is Friday night. Right. That's right. The intercessory prayer meeting Friday night. Thank you, Lord. Okay. Well, we're in chapter 8, and we got into this section briefly last week, and we'll just hurriedly go through. Now, someone asked me, they said, "Pastor, what's the best way for us to follow you on Wednesday night?" The best way is to have your Bible open. And if you are taking notes, have your notes open. But if you have the Bible open, you're going to see the words as I say them. Now, if you're just listening to me, because this is expository on Wednesday night, and we're taking word by word, and if you don't see it in its context, I see some of you turning and saying, "What did he say?" And it's right there in front of you. Now, I'm using King James because that's the Bible we provide in front of you. I will also read on occasions from the New American Standard, but if you have King James, you'll be right with us tonight. Chapter 1 begins by asking the question that we covered briefly last week: doesn't wisdom also cry? Are just the harlots and the prostitutes and the immoral voices of the world, appealing to young people. No, the psalmist says she stands in the top of high places by the way, verse 2. She stands at the hand of the gate, at the mouth, at the coming in of the doors, and she cries. In other words, what the passage is saying is, if you're deaf to wisdom, you're not listening. There's nothing secretive about God's truth. Let's turn this one off, please, and this one on. Thank you. There's nothing secretive about what God says. Nothing at all. Wisdom is open for every man who wants to seek and who wants to find. Verse 4 says, unto you, O men, I call. Now verse 5, and I want you to notice verse 5, because in a few moments, when we get into chapter 9, we're getting into the last admonitional discourse. This is the 14th admonitional discourse. The 15th is the next chapter, and then we're finished with these detailed discussions. Now, when you have studied Proverbs 1 through 9, you have completed the consistent teaching on the subject of wisdom. The rest of the Proverbs are sporadic, pithy words of statement about wisdom, but they have no set order, and they appear in without any particular direction. So we have completed our hard study when we get to the end of this. I'm going to take about 2 more Wednesday nights with you, and we're just going to have fun. And we're going to talk about living with a contentious woman, and we're going to talk about a lot of interesting things that Proverbs talks about. Just funny comparisons, interesting things. They're all wisdom, but they're not consistent expository teachings on wisdom. Now, verse 5 is interesting because wisdom says, O ye simple, understand wisdom. In chapter 9, the prostitute calls out again, and she says the same thing, only it's on a different basis. She says, now remember the word simple does not mean foolish or retarded. The word simple means the inexperienced person, the young person, or the person who's inexperienced. Now the prostitute calls to this person and says, you're simple, you're inexperienced, come to me and I'll show you about the ways of life. That's basic to it. And that's the old line. That's the line young people live with today. I hear it almost every day when we get into marital counseling or dealing with teenagers. We come up with that same thing. Well, I didn't want to be stupid on the subject. I didn't want to be out of it. I wanted to know, and so I entered into this experience that I might find out what it was all about. But here, wisdom says to the simple, to the inexperienced, understand wisdom. In other words, I will give you wisdom about this so that you will know more in truth than the person who has to immorally or illegally involve themselves in experience. Ye fools. Now the word fool here means heavy and dull people. O ye fools, be of an understanding heart. For I will speak excellent things, and this was the verse we stopped on last week. The word excellent means putting your priorities straight. Wisdom says, if you listen to me, I'm going to talk about noble, princely things. I'm going to set your affections on things which are above, where Christ dwelleth with the Father. If you listen to me, if you let me teach you, your values are going to be right. Now, I've found myself recently saying a lot of things about television, but I cannot speak as deeply as I feel in my heart about what is happening in our families on this subject. I have mentioned several times, just in passing, and I know a lot of families still allow it, and my children prefer to watch it, and if I'm out of town or they happen to be watching it without anyone controlling, they would turn to this program, Kung Fu. I don't think there has been a more diabolical program introduced that I know of in recent history to compromise concepts and introduce concepts of Eastern religion in such a subtle way. Now, I don't know whether you've read or not, but David Carradine, who's the star of Kung Fu, just the other day, on a drug trip, and he's been arrested 10 or 12 times within the last 6 months on major drug violations, one of his neighbors
saw a trail of blood leading from his house into Carradine's house and called the police, was afraid of finding a body. Carradine, in a drug trip, had broken his arm through a window and was bleeding basically to death when they finally got to him on a drug-related trip, because in this drug trip he had seen himself in some kind of a wall that he had to break out of, and he had broken through the window. Now I'm not picking on that one show because I don't like ABC television or whatever else, but to show you the subtlety with which satanic involvement comes into our families, and our children just get sucked up in this stuff. And mine are as guilty as any others. I'm not speaking as a pristine person. There's a television set in our home. Sometimes I wish there weren't. And I'm not saying everything on television is bad. I don't believe that any more than I think everything in the movies is bad. I think there's a great need for regulation and commitment and knowing what and why we watch or listen to or hear or respond to that which we do. But wisdom says here, if you will listen to me, my teaching will always point you to things that are excellent and have priority set on them. And of course, what is not said here is the opposite. If you listen to the world, you are always going to be lowering your set of values as to what is right, what is wrong, what you should do, how you should live and spend your life. Now, I do not believe in a legalistic standard on any of these subjects. And if you misquote me, I put heaping coals of fire in your head, because the one thing I don't want to lose is my reputation of being a liberal. It would just shock people in the Assemblies of God out of their socks if they thought I was becoming conservative overnight, and I wouldn't want that to happen. I do not believe the answer is legislating holiness. I do not believe the answer is saying, don't go here and don't go there and don't do this and don't do that. The answer is a God-ordained set of priorities in your own life. But let me tell you this, buddy. When a person really gets into this book and really, that's all right, Barbara, just leave it. It can't be that critical or important. Thank you. When a person really gets baptized into listening to what God has to say in His Word, then all of a sudden, what the world has to say seems so foolish. And I've noticed this. Have you listened, for example, I used to frequently listen to other kinds of music. I'm a music buff. I like forms of music. I like expressions of music. But have you listened recently to the words of popular songs, for example? Have you just taken time to listen to them? I mean, they make about as much sense as Mersey Dotes and Dozy Dotes and little whatever eats ivy. All right. Listen to wisdom, the Word says, and I will teach you excellent things. My mouth shall speak truth, and here again, the same. And I entered into this discussion with you because all of these things are a comparison of what wisdom teaches. My mouth speaks truth. And the interesting thing about the word speak here is meditate, and the concept of what is said here is, what I teach you is significant enough that you can wrap your teeth around it and think about it. Now, I'll tell you, there isn't much the world has to say that I want to meditate on. There's not much the world is teaching on television or anywhere else that helps me to sleep at night. I don't know about you, but I don't even like to listen to the news anymore, and I'm not talking about, I'm really beginning to sound radical. I'm going to have to talk to myself about this. But I find my spirit depressed and subject to emotions that I don't have the strength to waste my emotions on what happens when I spend my time listening to what the world is passing out. Do you understand what I'm saying? Some of you look like you're either shocked, you're in a state of shock, or whatever it is. And I want you to recover fast enough that you'll understand what I'm trying to say to you tonight. My mouth speaks truth, and the word is, what I say is significant enough that you can meditate on it. You can build your life on it. I'll tell you, when have you heard from the world something like, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the earth? When have you heard Something from the world, like the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He restoreth my soul. Wisdom speaks truth, and we can meditate on it. Again, wickedness is an abomination to my lips. There's a clue. And by the way, don't you stop wickedness as being something lustful or erotic. The Bible's already declared, he that sows discord among the brethren, speaking and accusing. I think the very spirit of criticism, which so often is a byproduct of church life, it seems, is a very inclusive word, and this wickedness is not in my lips. Wickedness is not in my lips. For in righteousness, in righteous passage, there is nothing forward or perverse in my words. This is what wisdom says in verse 9. And then it says, they are all plain to him that understands. They are intelligible, they are open, they are to the point to the man who will receive the things of God. Now I want you to listen to this verse, because this is the same verse that's echoed in the New Testament in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. But the natural man cannot receive the things of the Spirit, for they are spiritually understood. Only the spiritual man can understand the things of the Spirit. And I'll tell you, to me, it is a very tragic fact that we change whole church emphases when it comes to preaching the Word based on carnal and natural men, as opposed to doing what God declares in reference to spiritual truth. If a man will understand, God says, listen, my words, the words of wisdom are not hidden. I'm crying in the open place. They are revealed, and he who is open will receive them. They are understandable. No man can ever say about the things of God, they cannot be understood. They are plain to the Lord. In fact, Psalm 25, verse 14 says, the secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him. And if you are coming spiritually with an open heart to God, there's no mystery that God cannot reveal. I am constantly amazed at how God reveals deep spiritual things to people who are not deep thinkers or philosophers. But deep thinkers and philosophers without the Spirit cannot understand simple things of God. There's a mystery. And it depends on whether your heart's open to the Lord. Right to them. They are right to them that find knowledge. Verse 10, receive my instruction and not silver, and my knowledge rather than choice gold. The comparison here is just implied. What is being said in this verse is there ought to be a hunger in your heart. I mean, there ought to be such a hunger that missing an opportunity of sharing the Word of God would be a loss to you. And having that opportunity is a great find, a great privilege. See? Someone said recently, I think the words are so adequate, the two greatest tragedies in the Christian church. Number one, the things that upset Christians. And number two, the things that don't upset Christians. So often we're upset about absolutely nonsensical issues, and we get pivoted around them until they become classic detours of Satan. And the things that ought to burden us and break us, we pass by them every day without a tear. Verse 12 says, wisdom dwells with prudence. What does that mean? It's the same word. Wisdom inhabits prudence. It animates prudence. You say, what's prudence? Prudence is practical life. Practical decisions. Practical down-to-earth purposes. And what is being said here is that God, when we open our heart to him and we're learning wisdom, and maybe it seems philosophical, and maybe it seems otherworldly, and maybe it doesn't seem too practical, but when we learn the wisdom of God, what God promises is that wisdom inhabits the practical areas of our life. Suddenly, we find ourselves making decisions more clearly, more distinctly, more definitely. Our yeas are yeas and our nays are nays. We discover ourselves having better ability to discern. Our eyes become sharper. We're more aware of things. Why? Because God has promised when we take his wisdom, he inhabits the practical area of our lives. Then he says this: through wisdom you find out the knowledge of witty invention. Now, all that means is dark sayings and philosophic things. And listen to me. Please understand. Sometimes I know these statements can come across anti-intellectual. I'm a man who spent 6 years of my life in formal college. I have sat at the feet of some of the greatest scholars in America in seminar situations of 5 or 6 students. I believe in disciplining this mind to the sharpest response that you can. But what is being said here is that when a simple believer opens himself to the wisdom of God, he's able to understand dark, hard to understand subjects. Let me take a case in point. Let's take the case of death. Death is a question, and immortality is a question. I can take you to anybody. We can read Kant, Goethe, we can read Kierkegaard. We can read any of the philosophers and find them going through a maze of trying to understand death and immortality. God says it this way: death and immortality are brought to light in Christ. So when you're a believer, the wisdom of God inhabits you, and the dark, difficult items that philosophers and teachers spend their lives on, the believer understands immediately. Witty, dark sayings. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil. That's the reverse side of the fear of the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom. The reverse side of the coin that says to fear God is to begin to be wise. The reverse side is the coin that says if you really fear God, you hate evil. You identify with God. And it names things. The word says there's no fellowship between light and darkness. He who serves the Lord has to renounce the works of the devil. Pride and arrogance are the first two that's named. The evil way, the forward mouth. And by the way, that means literally a mouth of perverseness. Someday, I think I'll give a message that belongs to another man. I rarely do that. But Eleanor Bullock, some time ago, shared a tremendous tape and an outline of a message by Derek Prince on the abuse of the tongue. It's dynamite. And it's so important. Friend, listen, not in some judgmental way. I don't care if you're the pastor of the church or if you're an elder in the church. The tongue is a member set on fire by hell. And the moment you let up your guard, it shows where its source is. And I'm amazed sometimes when spiritual people lack discernment about who's in control of their tongue. It's amazing. I've been in very high spiritual conversations in which people were just like that. And yet they were spiritual conversations. The abuse of the tongue. Wisdom says, I have nothing to do with a forward mouth. There's no perverseness in my speech. Counsel is mine, sound wisdom. Here's the contrast. The word properly means, sound wisdom means to elevate your life, to give substance to your life. And this is what I will be a part of, the word says, and understanding, which is experience. I have strength. Verse 15, by me kings reign, princes and judges of the earth reign. And this is an interesting passage. If you're a Bible student, you want to just kind of underline those verses and compare them to Paul's teaching in either Romans or several of the New Testament passages, particularly